The room went dead silent. The only sound was the mechanical whir of the 3-ton titanium lock spinning. Marcus Sterling, the tech mogul worth $40 billion, stood there with a glass of champagne, laughing. He thought it was a joke. He thought the girl in the cheap uniform was just the help. He told her, "Open the safe, and the $100 million inside is yours." He didn't know who she really was. He didn't know that she had been waiting for this exact moment for 20 years. And when that safe door finally clicked open, the billionaire stopped laughing. This is the story of the most expensive mistake in history. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in New York City smelled of old money, heavy perfume, and truffle oil. For LaDonna Vance, it smelled like exhaustion. LaDonna adjusted the collar of her stiff black waistcoat, wincing as the cheap polyester rubbed against the sunburn on her neck. She had been on her feet since 4 a.m. It was now 9:30 p.m. Her lower back throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, a constant reminder of the double shifts she had pulled 6 days a week for the last 3 years. But she couldn't stop. Not with her mother's dialysis bills sitting in a terrifying stack on the kitchen counter of their cramped Queens apartment. Table 4 needs a top-up on the dom. The floor manager, a sweaty man named Mr. Henderson, hissed into her earpiece. And Vance? Try to look less like a funeral director. Smile. You're serving the elite. Yes, sir, LaDonna whispered, forcing a plastic smile onto her face. She grabbed a chilled bottle of Dom Perignon, 2012, and navigated the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. She was invisible here. To the guests, she wasn't a 26-year-old woman with a genius-level aptitude for mathematics and a scholarship to MIT that she had to turn down to care for her dying parent. To them, she was just a floating pair of hands holding a tray. Tonight was the launch of the Aegis Protocol, a new cybersecurity venture by Sterling Dynamics. And at the center of the room, holding court like a king, was the man himself, Marcus Sterling. Marcus was 55, though he looked 40 thanks to a team of nutritionists and plastic surgeons. He was handsome in a predatory way, with silver fox hair and teeth that were blindingly white. He was currently laughing at something a senator was saying, his hand resting casually on a large, ominous object covered by a velvet tarp in the center of the stage. LaDonna approached the table, pouring the champagne with practiced precision. She kept her eyes down, but she was listening. She was always listening. The stock is going to skyrocket by morning, Marcus, a man with a thick British accent said. But is it true? Is the prototype really unhackable? Marcus took a sip of his drink, his eyes scanning the room with arrogant boredom. Unhackable is an understatement, Julian. The Aegis Cube uses a quantum-encrypted shifting algorithm. The code changes every 10 seconds based on biometric data only I possess. It's not just a safe, it's a fortress. LaDonna finished pouring and stepped back into the shadows. She stared at the velvet tarp. Her heart did a strange, jagged flip in her chest. She knew that name, Sterling Dynamics. It was a name that had haunted her childhood, a name her father had cursed in his sleep before the alcohol finally took him. "Excuse me, miss." LaDonna snapped out of her trance. Marcus Sterling was looking directly at her. His eyes were icy blue, devoid of any real warmth. He held out his empty glass. "You're dripping condensation on the tablecloth," he said, his voice smooth but cutting. "It's sloppy." The table went silent. The senator, the British investor, and the 2 models hanging off Marcus's arms all turned to look at her. "I apologize, Mr. Sterling," LaDonna said, her voice steady despite the shaking of her hands. She reached for a napkin to dab the tiny wet spot. "Leave it. Marcus waved a hand dismissively. "Just get me another drink, and try to be useful this time." The table erupted in sycophantic laughter. LaDonna felt the heat rise in her cheeks, burning hot. She turned to leave, gripping the empty bottle so hard her knuckles turned white. "Swallow it," she told herself. "You need this job. You need the tips." But as she walked away, she heard Marcus's voice carry over the crowd. "It's pathetic, really," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "People like that. They drift through life with no ambition, no intellect. Just fetch and carry. You could put $1 million in front of them, and they wouldn't know how to grab it." LaDonna stopped. The noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull roar. A memory flashed in her mind. Her father, sitting at a kitchen table covered in blueprints, weeping. "He took it, LaDonna. He took the logic key. He took everything." She turned around. She wasn't supposed to. The cardinal rule of high-end service was to never engage. But something inside her, a dam built of 10 years of poverty and grief, had just cracked. She walked back to table 1. "Mr. Sterling," LaDonna said. The laughter at the table died instantly. Mr. Henderson, the manager, was sprinting across the room, his eyes wide with panic, but he was too far away. Marcus looked up, amused. "Yes. Did you forget the way to the bar?" "You said we wouldn't know how to grab it," LaDonna said, her voice ringing clear in the sudden silence of the ballroom. $1 million. You think intelligence is defined by the tax bracket you were born into? The room went quiet. People were turning around. A waiter talking back to Marcus Sterling. This was suicide. Marcus slowly set his glass down. He stood up, towering over her. A cruel smile played on his lips. He loved a show. He loved humiliating people. "Are you challenging me, darling?" he asked. "I'm correcting you," LaDonna replied. Marcus laughed, a deep, booming sound. He walked up to the stage and ripped the velvet tarp off the object. Underneath sat the Aegis cube. It was a sleek, black metal cube, about 3 feet wide, pulsating with a soft blue light. It didn't have a keypad. It had a single, smooth glass interface. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus shouted, throwing his arms wide. "We have a volunteer. This young lady seems to think she has hidden depths." He turned his predator gaze back to LaDonna. "Inside this safe," Marcus said, tapping the metal, "is a bearer bond, a certified transfer document for $100 million. It serves as the collateral for tonight's IPO." The crowd gasped. $100 million? Sitting right there? "You think you're smart?" Marcus sneered, leaning in close to LaDonna's face. "You think you're better than fetch and carry? Fine, I'll make you a deal, a bet." "Marcus, don't," his lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Gregson, warned from the side. "Quiet, Gregson," Marcus snapped. He looked at LaDonna. "If you can open this safe, right now in front of everyone, you keep what's inside. The $100 million. It's yours." The crowd murmured excitedly. Phones came out. They were recording. "And if I can't?" LaDonna asked. "Then you leave," Marcus whispered, his eyes dark. "And you ensure that you and every other person on this catering staff is fired and blacklisted from working in this city again." It was a cruel, disproportionate bet. The livelihood of 20 other people rested on her shoulders. Mr. Henderson was beside her now, grabbing her arm. "Vance, walk away. You're fired. Get out." LaDonna pulled her arm free. She looked at the safe. Then she looked at Marcus. She saw the arrogance. She saw the man who had destroyed her father. She realized something. Marcus was a narcissist, and narcissists always kept their trophies close. The code wouldn't be random. It would be a monument to his own ego. "I accept," LaDonna said. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted from a party to a gladiator arena. The DJ cut the music. The lights dimmed, focusing a single spotlight on the Aegis cube and the waitress standing before it. "You have 5 minutes," Marcus said, checking his diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch. "Entertaining as this is, I have a speech to give." LaDonna stepped up to the cube. Up close, it was intimidating. The interface was blank. There were no numbers, just a shifting geometric pattern. "It's biometric, darling," Marcus taunted from behind her. "It reads heartbeat, retina, and voice. Unless you can shapeshift into me, you're wasting everyone's time." LaDonna ignored him. She closed her eyes for a second, blocking out the hundreds of cameras pointing at her. She thought back to her father, Elias Thorne. 20 years ago, Elias had been Marcus Sterling's partner. They were young, hungry coders in a garage in Palo Alto. Elias was the architect. Marcus was the salesman. Elias had invented a polymorphic encryption method, a way to use emotional memory as a digital key. He called it the heartstring protocol. Marcus had stolen the patent, erased Elias's name from the company documents while Elias was in the hospital with pneumonia, and rebranded it as his own. Elias never recovered. He spent the rest of his life drinking cheap whiskey and rambling about the date the music died. LaDonna had memorized his journals. She knew the original logic of the code. The Aegis cube wasn't new tech. It was the original stolen tech, repackaged. And if it was based on the heartstring protocol, it didn't just read biometrics. It read intent. It needed a seed date to align the algorithm. 3 minutes, Marcus called out, sipping fresh champagne. The crowd chuckled. LaDonna looked at the glass interface. She placed her hand on it. The screen lit up red. "Access denied." "Wrong hand," a socialite giggled. LaDonna didn't flinch. She needed to input the seed date. But how? There was no keyboard. "Think, LaDonna. Dad said the interface responds to rhythm." She tapped the glass. Once, twice. A pause. 3 times. The geometric shapes on the screen slowed down. Marcus stopped drinking. He frowned. "What is she doing?" "She's bypassing the biometric scanner by overloading the tactile sensor," the British investor whispered, sounding stunned. That's a debugger's trick. How does a waitress know that?" LaDonna's mind was racing. She needed the date Marcus Sterling believed was the most important day of his life. Most people thought it would be his birthday, or the day Sterling Dynamics went public. But LaDonna knew Marcus. She knew him through her father's hate. Marcus was sentimental about only one thing: his victory. The day he officially signed the papers removing Elias Thorne from the company. The day he stole the empire. October 14th, 1998. But simply tapping the date wouldn't work. The encryption required a sequence. LaDonna began to tap the glass in a complex rhythmic pattern, mimicking the binary code for the numbers. Tap, tap, hold. Tap, tap, tap. The room was silent. The only sound was the rhythmic thud-thud of her finger against the glass. 2 minutes, Marcus yelled, though his voice sounded less confident now. He took a step forward. "This is boring. Security. Remove her." "Let her finish," someone from the crowd shouted. It was the senator. The crowd was turning. They loved the underdog. 1 minute. LaDonna was sweating. The sequence was long. She was on the final set of numbers. Her finger ached. 1, 9, 9, 8. She hit the final tap. The screen flashed yellow. "Processing." "Time's up," Marcus barked. "Get away from my safe." 2 large security guards in black suits stepped onto the stage. One of them reached for LaDonna's shoulder. "Don't touch me," LaDonna said, her voice low. "Get her out of here," Marcus snarled. The amusement was gone. He looked genuinely agitated. He didn't think she could open it, but the yellow light was making him nervous. The guard grabbed LaDonna's arm and yanked her back. "Party's over, miss." "Wait!" LaDonna screamed, pointing at the cube. The screen turned from yellow to a blinding solid green. A mechanical thunk echoed through the ballroom, loud as a gunshot. Then, the hiss of hydraulics. The heavy titanium door of the Aegis cube slowly swung open. The security guard froze. Marcus Sterling dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, shards of crystal exploding everywhere. But no one noticed. Inside the safe, illuminated by a soft white light, sat a single document in a leather casing. The bearer bond. $100 million. LaDonna shook off the guard's hand. She straightened her cheap waistcoat. She looked at Marcus, who was pale, his mouth slightly open, staring at the open safe like he was seeing a ghost. "I believe," LaDonna said into the silence, "that belongs to me." The silence in the grand ballroom was shattered by the sound of Marcus Sterling's laughter. It was a forced, jagged sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Bravo." Marcus clapped his hands together slowly. "Bravo. An excellent trick. Truly, a marvelous performance." He strode over to the open safe, placing his body between LaDonna and the document inside. He turned to the crowd, flashing his signature blinding smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for... What was your name again?" "LaDonna. Give it up for LaDonna, our shill for the evening. Didn't she do a fantastic job demonstrating the manual override features of the Aegis prototype?" The crowd hesitated. A few people clapped politely, confused, but most of them, including the sharp-eyed British investor, weren't buying it. "A shill?" LaDonna stepped around him, her voice raising. "We didn't rehearse this. You made a bet." Marcus's smile tightened. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep, hard enough to bruise. "Shut up," he hissed through his teeth, his voice too low for the microphones to catch. "Walk away now, and I won't have you arrested for corporate espionage." "You offered me the bond," LaDonna said, loudly. She wrenched her arm free. "Everyone here heard it. Open the safe, and the $100 million is yours. That is a verbal contract." "It was hyperbole," Marcus shouted, losing his composure. "It was a figure of speech. You are a waitress. Do you really think I'd give $100 million to someone who clears plates for a living?" "I think you made a mistake," LaDonna said, locking eyes with him. "And now you're trying to welch on a debt, because your ego wrote a check your technology couldn't cash." "Security!" Marcus screamed. The two guards who had been stunned into silence finally snapped into action. They lunged for LaDonna. One grabbed her shoulders, pinning her arms behind her back. The other moved to slam the heavy titanium door of the safe shut. "No!" LaDonna yelled, struggling. "That's mine! You can't do this!" "Get her out of here," Marcus commanded, adjusting his tuxedo jacket. "And confiscate her phone. I want to know who gave her the codes. She's obviously a plant from a competitor." "I used the rhythm," LaDonna shouted as she was dragged backward, her heels skidding on the polished floor. "October 14th, 1998, the day you stole the code from Elias Thorne. That's the key, isn't it, Marcus? You used your own sin as the password." Marcus froze. His face went drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. The murmurs in the crowd grew to a roar. "Elias Thorne?" someone whispered. "Wasn't that the co-founder who died broke?" Marcus looked at his lawyer, Gregson. "Clear the room. Now. Cut the live stream." But it was too late. The room was a sea of glowing rectangles. Hundreds of phones were recording. The incident was already streaming on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. The hashtag #the Waitress and the Billionaire was born in that very second. LaDonna was hauled out of the ballroom, through the service doors, and into the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hotel kitchen. The cooks and other servers watched in shock as she was manhandled toward the back freight elevator. Mr. Henderson, the manager, was running alongside them, sweating profusely. "Mr. Sterling, please, she's fired. We'll handle it internally." "Internal isn't good enough," Gregson, the lawyer, barked, following close behind. "She hacked a proprietary device. This is a federal offense. Take her to the hotel security holding room. I'm calling the NYPD." LaDonna stopped fighting. She knew she couldn't physically overpower two men who weighed 250 pounds each. She needed to save her energy. She needed her mind. As the elevator doors closed, shutting out the noise of the party, she looked at the lawyer. "You can call the police," LaDonna said calmly, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "But you might want to call your PR team first, because I saw the view count on the nearest phone before they dragged me out. 50,000 people just watched Marcus Sterling steal $100 million from a waitress." Gregson stared at her, his eyes narrowing. He pulled out his phone and checked Twitter. His face fell. "It's trending," he whispered. "Top 10 globally." The holding room was a small, windowless concrete box in the basement of the Pierre. LaDonna sat on a metal chair, her hands cuffed to the table. They had taken her phone, her apron, and her name tag. She had been there for an hour. The door buzzed and opened. Marcus Sterling walked in. He had abandoned the champagne glass for a tumbler of scotch. He looked less like a king now, and more like a cornered animal. Gregson followed him, carrying a briefcase. Marcus sat opposite her. He didn't speak for a long time. He just stared at her, analyzing her face. "You have his eyes," Marcus said finally. "Elias, you have his sad, pathetic eyes." "I have his memory too," LaDonna replied. "You're the daughter? LaDonna? Thorne? Vance. I took my mother's name after you ruined ours." Marcus took a sip of scotch. "I didn't ruin him, LaDonna. The industry is survival of the fittest. Elias was a poet writing code. I was a businessman building an empire. He was too soft for this world." "He was your friend," LaDonna said. "And you waited until he was in the ICU to forge his signature on the transfer of IP rights." "Allegedly," Gregson interjected smoothly. "That case was settled out of court 10 years ago." "Settled for pennies because my mother couldn't afford a lawyer," LaDonna snapped. "Enough history." Marcus waved his hand. He placed the tumbler on the table. "Let's talk about the future. Specifically, your future. Right now, you are looking at 5 to 10 years in prison. Attempted grand larceny. Corporate espionage. Hacking. I didn't hack anything," LaDonna said. "You invited me to open the safe. I used the interface provided. I won the bet." "There is no record of a bet," Marcus lied smoothly. "It was a magic trick, a performance. You went off script." He signaled to Gregson. The lawyer opened the briefcase and slid a check across the table. LaDonna looked down. It was a cashier's check for $50,000. "This is a lot of money for someone like you," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a fake, benevolent tone. "It pays off your mother's medical bills. Yes, we looked that up. It gets you out of debt. You take this, you sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that tonight was a staged prank, and you walk away." LaDonna looked at the check. It was more money than she made in 2 years. It could save her mum. It could buy them heat for the winter. But she looked at Marcus. She saw the smugness. He thought everyone had a price. He thought he could buy his way out of humiliation. "You owe me $100 million, LaDonna said quietly. Marcus laughed. "Be realistic, girl. You are a waitress. What are you going to do with $100 million? You'd spend it on clothes and bad investments. I am building the future." "I don't want the money for clothes," LaDonna said. She leaned forward. "I want to buy back my father's patents. I want to put his name back on the company you built on his back." Marcus's face hardened. He snatched the check back and tore it in half. "Then you get nothing," he snarled. "Gregson, call the commissioner. Tell him I want her booked. Maximum charges. Make sure she doesn't get bail." "You can't do that," LaDonna said. "I am Marcus Sterling." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "I can do whatever I want. By tomorrow morning, the news cycle will have moved on. People will forget. But you will rot in a cell." He walked to the door. "Enjoy the hospitality, Miss Vance." The door slammed shut. The lock engaged. LaDonna sat alone in the silence. Tears pricked her eyes. She was terrified. He was right. He had billions. She had nothing. Who would believe her? Who would fight for her? Then she remembered something. Before the guards had grabbed her, before they took her phone, she had managed to do one thing. When the safe opened, she hadn't just stood there. She had quickly snapped a photo of the bearer bond with her phone. The guards had taken her phone, yes. But they hadn't realized that her phone was set to automatically back up photos to the cloud, and the cloud account was shared with her best friend, a freelance journalist named Jax. LaDonna smiled. It was a small, trembling smile. "You think the news cycle moves on, Marcus?" she whispered to the empty room. "You have no idea how the internet works." Marcus Sterling woke up in his penthouse overlooking Central Park. He felt good. He had made a few calls last night, greased a few palms. The police had picked up the girl. The narrative was being spun. Deranged waitress attacks, CEO during presentation. He reached for his iPad to check the stock prices. He expected a slight dip, nothing he couldn't handle. He unlocked the screen. His notifications were full. Not just full, they were exploding. 50,000 unread mentions on X, formerly Twitter. His email inbox had crashed. He opened the news app. The headline wasn't what he expected. Headline: "The 100 million lie. Billionaire scams working-class hero." He clicked the article. There was the video. But there was something else. A high-resolution photo of the bearer bond sitting inside the safe, time-stamped exactly when the safe opened. The caption read, "Marcus Sterling bet 100 mattrel she couldn't open it. She did. He had her arrested. Who is the real criminal?" And below that, a thread by a user named Adz Tussi Justice for LaDonna, Jax, dissecting the code she used, October 14th, 1998, the day Sterling stole the code. This wasn't a hack. It was poetic justice. Marcus threw the iPad across the room. It shattered against the wall. "Gregson!" he screamed. City jail, holding cell. LaDonna was sitting on a hard bench, shivering. She hadn't slept. The cell smelled of bleach and despair. "Vance!" a guard shouted. "Legal counsel is here." LaDonna stood up, confused. I can't afford a lawyer. I asked for a public defender." "Not this one, honey. You got the shark." The gate buzzed open. LaDonna walked into the visitation room. Sitting there wasn't a tired, overworked public defender. It was a woman in a razor-sharp red power suit, with dark hair pulled back into a severe bun and glasses that probably cost more than LaDonna's car. It was Evelyn Cross. LaDonna gasped. Everyone knew Evelyn Cross. She was the most feared civil litigator in New York. She was known as the Guillotine, because once she took a case, she severed the opposition's head. She only took high-profile cases, usually defending celebrities. "Ms. Cross," LaDonna stammered. I don't have any money." Evelyn Cross looked up from her file. She smiled, and it was a terrifyingly confident smile. "Sit down, LaDonna." LaDonna sat. "You don't need money," Evelyn said. tapping a perfectly manicured fingernail on the metal table. "You are currently the most famous woman in America. I've had 3 movie producers call my office this morning asking for your life rights. A GoFundMe set up for your legal defense hit $2 million 10 minutes ago." LaDonna's mouth dropped open. 2 million. "People hate billionaires, LaDonna," Evelyn said with a shrug, "and they love a Cinderella story, especially a Cinderella who beat the villain at his own game." Evelyn slid a document across the table. "I'm taking your case pro bono on one condition." "What condition?" "We don't settle." Evelyn's eyes glinted. "Sterling is going to offer you 5 million, 10 million, maybe 20 to make this go away. He's scared. But I've been waiting for a chance to take a shot at Sterling Dynamics for years. We go for the full 100 million. And we go for damages. We destroy him." LaDonna looked at the document. It was a representation agreement. She thought about her father. She thought about the arrogance in Marcus's eyes when he tore up the check. She thought about the look on the security guard's face when he threw her in the cell. She picked up the pen. "Where do I sign?" The courtroom felt less like a hall of justice and more like the inside of a pressure cooker. The air conditioning in the historic building was struggling to battle the unseasonably warm October heat and the body heat of 300 spectators packed into the gallery. LaDonna Vance sat at the plaintiff's table. She wasn't wearing her waitress uniform anymore. She wore a simple, tailored black suit that Evelyn had bought for her. Her hair was pulled back, revealing a face that had grown thinner and sharper over the last 3 months of litigation. She looked tired, but her eyes were alert, scanning the jury box. Across the aisle, the defense table was a fortress of high-priced legal talent. Marcus Sterling sat in the center, flanked by 4 lawyers. He looked bored. Throughout the trial, he had treated the proceedings with the disdain of a man who viewed the law as a minor inconvenience, like traffic or bad weather. He spent most of the time checking his watch or whispering jokes to his lead counsel, Gregson. Gregson stood up, buttoning his jacket. "The defense rests, Your Honor." A ripple of surprise went through the room. They hadn't called Marcus to the stand. It was a strategic move. Gregson knew Marcus was volatile. He wanted to rely on the argument that the bet was clearly a joke and that LaDonna had used an unauthorized exploit to open the safe. Judge Harrison looked over her spectacles. "Ms. Cross? Rebuttal?" Evelyn Cross stood up. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at Marcus Sterling. "The plaintiff calls Marcus Sterling to the stand as a hostile witness." Gregson shot up. "Objection! This is highly irregular. Mr. Sterling has already submitted a sworn affidavit." "And now I would like to cross-examine him on it," Evelyn said, her voice cool and sharp as a scalpel. "Unless the defendant is afraid to speak under oath." Judge Harrison banged her gavel. "Overruled. Mr. Sterling, please take the stand." Marcus sighed, a theatrical exhale that the microphone picked up. He stood, smoothed his silk tie, and walked to the witness box. He moved with the prowling grace of a jungle cat. He winked at a reporter in the front row. He was winning the PR war, or so he thought. He sat down, swore to tell the truth, and looked at Evelyn with a smirk. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Evelyn began. She didn't stay behind the podium. She walked into the well of the court, pacing slowly. "Is it?" Marcus quipped. "I've had better mornings." Light laughter from the defense side. "Let's talk about the night of the gala," Evelyn said, ignoring the joke. "You stood before a crowd of 200 people and live stream cameras. You pointed to the Aegis Cube. You said, and I quote, 'Open the safe, and the $100 million inside is yours.' Did you say those words?" "I did," Marcus nodded. "Was there a teleprompter?" "No." "Was there a script?" "No." "So, These were your own words, spoken of your own free will? They were figures of speech, Marcus said, leaning back comfortably. Miss Cross, if I told someone, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, would you expect me to actually consume a stallion? It was hyperbole. Everyone in the room understood that. Except apparently your client. He gestured dismissively toward LaDonna. LaDonna didn't flinch. She held his gaze. Hyperbole. Evelyn repeated the word, tasting it. Interesting defense. But in contract law, intent is determined by the reasonable expectations of the audience. You are a man known for eccentric displays of wealth. You once bought a private island because you liked the shape of the coastline. Why should the audience assume this display of wealth was fake? Because she is a waitress, Marcus snapped, his facade slipping for a fraction of a second. The offer was clearly rhetorical, because the task was supposed to be impossible. The Aegis Cube is unhackable. Unhackable, Evelyn said. She walked back to her table and picked up a heavy bound document. Let's discuss that. She dropped the document on the witness stand, railing with a heavy thud. This is the technical audit of the Aegis Cube source code. We subpoenaed it during discovery. It took your team 6 weeks to release it. They fought us every step of the way. Do you know why? I am a CEO, Miss Cross. I don't debug code, Marcus scoffed. No, you don't. You steal it. Objection, Gregson roared. Withdrawn, Evelyn said quickly, smiling. Mr. Sterling, your defense claims that Ms. Vance used a glitch, or a lucky guess, to bypass the biometric security. But that's not true, is it? She tapped on the glass like a woodpecker, Marcus said. It was dumb luck. Turn to page 412, please. Marcus hesitated. He opened the binder. Read the highlighted section, strictly the comments in the code, Evelyn instructed. Marcus stared at the page. His jaw tightened. He didn't speak. Read it, Mr. Sterling, Judge Harrison ordered. Marcus cleared his throat. His voice was lower now, stripped of its arrogance. Project Heartstring, Legacy Override Protocol, author E.T. E.T., Evelyn said. Elias Thorne, your former partner, the man who died penniless while you became a billionaire. The courtroom went deadly silent. This isn't a glitch, Evelyn said, her voice rising to fill the room. It is a back door, a founder's key. Elias Thorne built it into the original kernel of the operating system 20 years ago. It allows for manual override in case of biometric failure. And do you know what the passcode is? Marcus remained silent. He was gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. The passcode is a date, Evelyn continued. October 14th, 1998. Does that date ring a bell, Mr. Sterling? It's just a date, Marcus muttered. Is it? Evelyn turned to the jury. We looked it up. October 14th, 1998 isn't just a random Tuesday. It is the day you filed the paperwork to remove Elias Thorne from the company board. It is the day you signed the exclusivity rights to his patents while he was in a medically induced coma. The gallery gasped. The reporters were typing furiously. Evelyn spun back to Marcus. Elias knew, didn't he? He knew you were going to push him out. So he buried a ghost in the machine. He set the password to the day of your betrayal, knowing that only someone who knew the true history of the company could ever open it. This is irrelevant, Marcus shouted. Ancient history. It has nothing to do with the contract. It has everything to do with the contract. Evelyn slammed her hand on the railing, startling the jury. You claimed the safe was secure. You claimed only you could open it. You were wrong. The machine recognized the code. It recognized the rhythm. When LaDonna Vance tapped that date, the machine didn't see a waitress. It recognized the daughter of its creator. She is a nobody. Marcus stood up. his face flushing a deep, angry red. "She has no right to that money. I built Sterling Dynamics from the ground up. I took Elias's useless poetry and turned it into a product. I did the work. I deserve the reward." "So you admit it?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Admit what?" "You admit that your refusal to pay her isn't about the joke. It isn't about hyperbole. It's about your belief that she and her father are beneath you, that you are entitled to their labor and their genius without paying for it." "I am entitled to whatever I can take," Marcus roared. The mask was fully off now. The charming billionaire was gone. The shark was visible. "That is how the world works. Lions do not pay the sheep for the privilege of eating them." "She opened the safe?" "Fine. But she is a servant. She fetches drinks. She does not get $100 million just because she knows a piece of history." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood there, chest heaving, realizing too late what he had just said. He looked at the jury. The 12 men and women were staring at him with expressions ranging from disgust to horror. He looked at Judge Harrison, who was writing something down with a severe expression. Evelyn Cross stepped back. She didn't need to say anything else. She had handed him the shovel, and he had dug his own grave. "Mr. Sterling," Evelyn said, her voice calm and final, "you made an offer. Open the safe, and the money is yours. You set the conditions. The machine validated the success. And now you have admitted under oath that your only reason for non-payment is your own prejudice." She closed her folder. "No further questions, Your Honor." Marcus sank back into the witness chair. He looked small. He looked at Gregson, but his lawyer refused to make eye contact, busying himself with packing up his papers. As Marcus stepped down from the stand and walked back to the defense table, he had to pass LaDonna. For the first time in the entire trial, he looked her in the eye. He didn't see fear anymore. He didn't see a waitress. He saw Elias Thorne's eyes, staring back at him with the weight of 20 years of justice waiting to be served. LaDonna didn't blink. She watched him sit down. She watched his hands shake as he reached for a glass of water. "We got him," Evelyn whispered to LaDonna, though she kept her face neutral. He just gave the jury permission to hate him. LaDonna took a deep breath. She looked at the empty witness stand. "It's not about the money anymore," she whispered back. "It's about the truth." Judge Harrison cleared her throat. "Closing arguments will begin at 2:20 p.m. Court is in recess." The gavel banged, signaling the end of the battle, but the war was just about to reach its final, explosive conclusion. The deliberation, 11:42. The air in the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of old mahogany, floor wax, and the nervous sweat of 100 people packed into a space meant for 50. The jury had been out for 48 hours. LaDonna Vance sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned the color of bone. She wasn't looking at the empty jury box. She was looking at the back of her mother's head in the front row. Her mother, who had worn her best Sunday dress, a faded floral print that had seen better decades, sat upright, trembling slightly. Beside LaDonna, Evelyn Cross was the picture of predatory calm. The lawyer was scrolling through her phone, checking the global markets. "Stop worrying," Evelyn whispered, not looking up. "The length of the deliberation is good. It means they aren't just dismissing us. They are arguing over the numbers." "Or they're arguing over whether I'm a thief," LaDonna whispered back, her voice dry. Across the aisle, Marcus Sterling looked like a man unraveling. The perfectly tailored navy suit he wore couldn't hide the fact that he had lost 10 pounds since the trial began. His leg bounced inadvertently beneath the table, a rapid, nervous tick. He was whispering furiously to Gregson, his lead counsel, who looked pale and exhausted. The double doors at the back of the room opened. The bailiff stepped in. "All rise." The noise in the gallery cut off instantly. It was as if someone had sucked the oxygen out of the room. Judge Harrison entered, her black robes billowing, her face unreadable. She took her seat and surveyed the room over her spectacles. "Bring in the jury," she commanded. LaDonna's heart hammered against her ribs. Thud. 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 It reminded her of the rhythm she had tapped on the safe. October 14th, 1998, the day everything broke. Today, October 20th, 20 years later, was the day it would either be fixed or destroyed forever. The jurors filed in. They looked tired. The foreman, a middle-aged school teacher named Mr. Gable, clutched a verdict sheet in his hands. He refused to look at Marcus Sterling. That was the tell. Evelyn nudged LaDonna's knee under the table. "He's not looking at the defendant," she murmured. "We won." The verdict. "Have you reached a verdict?" Judge Harrison asked. "We have, Your Honor." Mr. Gable's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Please read it for the record." Mr. Gable unfolded the paper. The rustle of the paper was the loudest sound in New York City. "In the matter of Vance v. Sterling Dynamics," Gable began, his voice gaining strength, "regarding the charge of breach of contract, we find in favor of the plaintiff." A collective gasp ripped through the room. LaDonna let out a sharp breath, her eyes instantly filling with tears. "We award the plaintiff the full value of the bearer bond, $100 million. Marcus Sterling slammed his fist onto the table. "This is a farce." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Harrison barked. "Continue, Mr. Foreman." "Regarding the charge of intentional infliction of emotional distress," Gable continued, glancing at LaDonna with a soft, sympathetic look, "we find in favor of the plaintiff." Gregson, the defense lawyer, put his head in his hands. "We find that the conduct of the defendant was malicious and egregious," Gable read. "We award punitive damages in the amount of $75 million. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't just noise, it was an explosion. Reporters were shouting into their lapel mics. The gallery was on its feet. LaDonna felt her mother's arms wrap around her neck from behind the railing, sobbing. $175 million. It was an unfathomable amount of money. It was enough to buy the Pierre Hotel, not just work in it. "Order! Order in this court!" Judge Harrison banged her gavel, the sound cracking like pistol shots. "Mr. Sterling, control yourself, or I will hold you in contempt." Marcus was standing, his face a mottled purple. He was pointing a shaking finger at LaDonna. "You think you've won? You think this is over? I will appeal this until you are old and grey. You will never see a dime. I will bury you in paperwork for the next 50 years. Evelyn Cross stood up, smoothing her skirt. She turned to Marcus, her expression bored. "Actually, Marcus, I don't think you'll have the capital to fund an appeal." "I am worth $40 billion, Marcus screamed. "Check your phone," Evelyn said simply. The crash. The commotion in the courtroom shifted. People weren't looking at LaDonna anymore. They were looking at their screens. A strange, low murmur began to ripple through the reporters at the back. "Trading halted," someone whispered. "It's a free fall," another voice said, louder. Marcus snatched his phone from the table. His hands shook so badly he could barely unlock it. He opened his brokerage app. His face went slack. All the color drained away, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting in the heat. The verdict had been live-streamed. The world had seen Marcus Sterling exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief who stole his core technology from a dying friend. The revelation about the heartstring protocol during the trial had been damaging, but the verdict was the nail in the coffin. Institutional trust in Sterling Dynamics had evaporated in seconds. Sterling Dynamics, STR. 48% market status. Trading halted due to volatility. My stock, Marcus whispered. It's half gone. Confidence is a fragile thing, Marcus, Evelyn said, stepping out from behind the table. The market doesn't like CEOs who defraud their founders and bully waitresses. The board of directors has called an emergency meeting. They're voting in 20 minutes. I hear they are looking for a scapegoat. Marcus looked up, his eyes wide with panic. I am the majority shareholder. I own 30% of the company. They can't vote me out. You owned 30%? LaDonna spoke up. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. She stood up slowly. She didn't look like the terrified girl in the cheap waistcoat anymore. She looked tall. She looked like her father. LaDonna walked toward the defense table. The bailiffs moved to intercept her, but Evelyn waved them off. What are you talking about? Marcus hissed. I haven't sold a single share. No, LaDonna said, stopping 3 feet from him. But you leveraged them. We did our homework, Marcus. You took out massive personal loans to fund your Aegis protocol launch, using your stock as collateral. When the stock price hit $48, which it did 3 minutes ago, the bank issued a margin call. Marcus stopped breathing. You didn't have the cash to cover it, LaDonna continued, her voice steady, reciting the facts like a mathematical equation. So the banks liquidated your position, automatically. 5 minutes ago, millions of your shares hit the open market at a discount. And who do you think bought them? LaDonna asked. Marcus stared at her. No, you don't have that kind of money. Even with the verdict, you don't have the cash yet. I don't, LaDonna admitted. But we do. The truth about the crowd. LaDonna turned to the gallery. She pointed to the back of the room, where a young man with messy hair and a Justice for LaDonna t-shirt was standing. It was Jax, her best friend. He was holding up his laptop. On the screen was a dashboard for a decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, a digital investment fund. When you had me arrested, LaDonna said, turning back to Marcus, you made a mistake. You made me a symbol. People were angry, Marcus. They were tired of men like you winning. So Jack set up a fund, the Retribution Fund. $5 here, $10 there. Teachers, nurses, truck drivers, waitresses. 2 million people donated. Then the whales came in, Evelyn added with a smirk. Competitors of yours, tech moguls who hated your monopoly. They poured in billions, entrusting the voting rights to LaDonna. LaDonna took a step closer. We raised $4 billion in liquid capital, waiting for the dip. When your stock crashed 5 minutes ago, we bought it all, every single share the bank sold. She pulled a folded document from her pocket and slapped it onto the defense table, right on top of his legal pad. I control 51% of the voting stock of Sterling Dynamics, LaDonna said. I am the company now. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the judge was leaning forward, stunned. Marcus looked at the document. He looked at the stock ticker on his phone, which was still red, flashing the death of his empire. He looked at LaDonna. You're a waitress, he stammered, his worldview shattering. You serve coffee. I serve justice, LaDonna corrected. The final blow. Here is how this is going to work, LaDonna said, her voice ringing with authority. You are fired, effective immediately. Your security clearance is revoked. Your keycard will not work when you try to re-enter the building. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The $75 million in punitive damages? LaDonna gestured to the air. I'm donating every cent of it to STEM scholarships for underprivileged kids. Kids like me. Kids whose parents were crushed by people like you. But I'm keeping the company, LaDonna's eyes hardened, turning to steel. And the first thing I am going to do is rebrand. The name Sterling Dynamics is dead. You can't erase me, Marcus whispered, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. I built this. You stole it, LaDonna shouted, her composure finally cracking for a split second, revealing the grieving daughter beneath. You stole the code. You stole the logic. You stole my father's life. She took a deep breath, composing herself. My father called it the heartstring protocol, because he believed technology should serve humanity, not control it. We are going back to that mission. LaDonna leaned in close, so only Marcus could hear her. The new name of the company is Thorn Technologies. My father's name will be on the building. His name will be on the paychecks. His name will be on the code. And you? You will be a footnote. A warning story told to business students about the dangers of arrogance. She stood up straight and turned her back on him. We're done here, Evelyn. Let's go. The exit LaDonna walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. They weren't cheering anymore. They were staring in awe. She wasn't just a lottery winner. She was a titan. She passed her mother, who was weeping with joy. LaDonna paused, kissing her mother on the forehead. It's over, Mom. Dad can rest now. She walked through the double doors and into the hallway. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind her, muting the sudden roar of noise that erupted in the courtroom, the sound of Marcus Sterling screaming, the sound of reporters shouting questions, the sound of the old world crumbling. LaDonna walked toward the exit of the courthouse. The massive glass doors loomed ahead. Through them, she could see the bright, blinding light of the midday sun and the sea of cameras waiting for her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her old name tag. LaDonna, service staff. She looked at it for a moment, running her thumb over the cheap plastic. Then she tossed it into the trash can by the security checkpoint. She pushed the doors open and stepped out into the light. LaDonna Vance didn't just win a bet. She reclaimed her legacy. She proved that integrity and intelligence are worth more than any bank account. Marcus Sterling learned the hard way. Never underestimate the person serving your table. They might just own the place one day. What would you do if you were LaDonna? Would you have taken the $50,000 and walked away, or would you fight? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story about justice served cold. Thanks for watching.